my favorite part of this. Reading number 2. This was in the chapter on truth and journalism. I tried whenever I could, because in some ways this is an autobiographical book. Because it's, in some ways, my quest for truth and how to figure out truth and lies. And in some places there are stories. And this is one of the longer stories. This isn't, the whole book isn't like this. But this is one of the longer stories that I like, hopefully illustrating the point about journalism. And the title of this section is, "The Time My Family Caused a Bomb Scare." In, I believe it was 1996, the 3 Leonard boys, I being the middle child, were gathered at our stepmother's house. Our father had passed away the previous year, and we had gathered to sort through some of his possessions. I don't know if I can do my stepmother's voice. "While you're here," my stepmother said, "can you look in the crawl space of the house? Your father seems to have shoved something under there." Cue foreboding music. A little background is necessary here. Before my father went into Special Forces, he had spent some time in the Army Engineers. Engineers work with dynamite a lot, and much as you might accidentally bring a pen home from work, my father would absent-mindedly bring home explosives. As it happened, our hobby farm had a number of inconveniently placed trees. Cutting them down was difficult enough, but removing the stumps from the ground was a real pain. A little bit of dynamite provided both labor savings and cheap entertainment. Our father and we 3 boys would sit on the back porch and wait for the timed munitions to go off, much as other people would wait for a parade. The resulting explosion would blow the tree, root and all, right out of the ground and across the driveway as debris rained down on the porch roof overhead. Ah, the innocence of youth. We sat there with no awareness whatsoever that this might be even remotely dangerous. So, with this glorious childhood, we were not terribly surprised at the contents of the garbage bag stuffed under our stepmother's house. We began neatly piling the contents on the slide lawn as we took them out of the bag. First, there was a glass jar filled with black powder, which Dad probably used with some of his primitive firearms. Next was a spool of det cord, a high-speed fuse that looks like a thick plastic wire. Then we pull out a smaller bag containing plastic caps. You can blow off several fingers if you handle those wrong, so we quickly set those down. Lastly, we pulled out a decaying white box which contained some very decomposed-looking cylinders, roughly 1.5 foot long by 1/2 inch wide. I pulled those out for a better look, poked around the box a bit, and placed that on the ground as well. We stood there pondering our next move for a few minutes. Suddenly, my older brother blurted out, "You know, that white thing looks like Dad's old dynamite box." I was 5 years younger and had never seen the box, so this was a surprise to me. I gave Leonard, footnote, not a typo, some harsh words for allowing me to play with what could well have been unstable dynamite. Do you remember the episode of Lost, where the science teacher yells at the main characters for carelessly handling the century-old dynamite sticks, and how his whole body just disappeared when the stick he was waving around to emphasize his point exploded? Fortunately, I saw that episode many years after this incident. Anyway, we brothers figured that identifying the threat level of the decayed cylinders was important, so we called the police to come have a look-see. A particularly bored-looking representative of the constabulary arrived shortly thereafter and ambled up the driveway towards us. His mood instantly changed when he saw what we had, and he struck a pose that looked, I swear it, exactly like Barney Fife from the Andy Griffith Show. After a moment of shocked silence, he yelled out, "Golly!
That there is det cord. You shouldn't have that det cord. It's dangerous.
Now, if you were to wrap det cord around your arm and attach a blasting cap to it, the det cord, not your arm, that could be a pretty dangerous situation. This det cord, however, was simply sitting on the ground attached to its little det cord spool, minding its own business. Before we had a chance to say, yes, we know that's det cord, but could you take a look in the little white box? Barney ran out of the driveway and began flinging open the doors of other houses in the neighborhood.
Get out! Get out now! Get out! You need to get out!
We were a little too far away to hear what he was saying.
Run!
It might have been a calm explanation of what was happening nearby, but for all we know, he was simply yanking doors open at random, yelling,
Go away! Run for the hills! Go! Run!
his
Again! Run! Det cord! Keep on!
His concern for the safety of the neighbors notwithstanding, he apparently felt we were perfectly fine standing 3 feet away from the dreaded det cord. He never talked to us again. Barney apparently knew how to work up the police radio, as we were eventually joined by a fire truck, maybe it was 2 fire trucks, it's been a while, an ambulance, and several more police cars. The firemen were a bit more social and actually asked some questions about what we had found. They finally suggested, well, let's move you away from here because, you know, paperwork. This latter approach was more the sort of thing we expected from Southeast Ohio emergency personnel. It turned out that the closest bomb expert was an hour and a half away in Columbus, so we mostly just hung out for a while with a few members of the media taking pictures from the fringes. The bomb expert finally arrived, poked at the materials briefly, and declared that the decayed cylinders were actually ammo for a flare gun. He then directed his teenage assistant to toss all the stuff in his trunk, and they drove off. This was a bit of a letdown. Not only were the materials not exciting enough for him to open his eyes all the way, they weren't even dangerous enough for him to go to the trouble of bending over. Perhaps wanting to salvage some dignity from this debacle, the powers that be then decided it was time to search the house. The problem with this plan was my father and stepmother had somehow acquired a bizarre-looking mixed-breed pit bull. Did I lose my thing? Am I good?
No.
You're good.
Good. In some freak of genetic recombination, the beast had a normal large dog's body, but the head of a pit bull. It looked like the alien creature from The Thing had taken over a retriever's body and had popped off the original head, replacing it with a new pit bull head. If someone had painted stitches all over the base of the dog's neck, it could not have looked more abnormal. The beast would not have mixed well with a bunch of strangers searching through the house. Fortunately, it was very fond of my aged and perpetually soft-spoken stepmother, and meekly followed her out of the house. This comically mismatched pair went for a walk as the police and firemen conducted their fruitless search for hidden contraband. Getting home shortly before 6, we turned on the news, wondering if we would get a brief mention. The opening credits rolled, and the camera zoomed in on the anchor's face, her brow furrowed in concentration. There was a dramatic pause. Then, a little more dramatic pausing. Then suddenly,
Bomb scare, Marietta!
there were some long shots of emergency vehicles and of us walking about. There was a brief outline on the facts of the case. Then, it got weird. They cut to a shot of the side of my stepmother's house. A reporter breathlessly intoned,
This is the actual crawl space which the explosives were removed from.
Then they cut to another shot of some bedraggled elderly woman inside of her house, dragging an oxygen tank behind her. Another reporter partly in the shot, dramatically declared in her best nervous aunt voice,
Because of her oxygen, the woman could not be evacuated from the danger zone.
I sat there in the living room. Ladies and gentlemen, Don and Joyce Reback. I sat there in the living room with a number of confused impressions. My first thought was, wow, that was a lot more exciting than actually being there. It had been an interesting day, but not nearly as breathtaking as the news report. The other impression I had was that while the story they were reporting was certainly dramatic, it wasn't the story that actually happened. They didn't show my brother saying, you know, that white thing looks like Dad's old dynamite box. They didn't have a shot of the beast. They hadn't filmed the anticlimactic ending of all the scary things being offhandedly dumped into a trunk. Obviously, they couldn't be everywhere to film all this, but there wasn't even a mention of the fact that the devices had turned out to be relatively harmless. Instead, they somehow found some sweet elderly lady attached to an oxygen tank to exploit. How'd they find this one anyway? They told their story, but it didn't seem to have much to do with the one I had been in. And no, the Marietta Times did print a much more even-handed and informative story the next day, August 19th. We made the top of the front page. Thus ends the second reading